Go to the back road. Don't get too close. Okay. Hi. Parenting. The parenting class. Yes. How are you? Good.
It's round two for me. Round two for me. What's up, everybody?
Round two.
Brother, we moved Brother Rick over there. We had to have more room. Yes. Y'all think I spit? Y'all ain't seen spit. She can harp one up. Just
Hey, you got that air now?
you need that air down?
Yeah, I do.
Are y'all looking? Are y'all in Brother Rick's class? Are y'all coming to step? Well, praise the Lord. It is.
I'm having to double dip tonight.
Just you all.
I have to take notes for me.
Guess when we run out of seats, it's time to go, right? Oh, there's a clock back there. Okay, good. Hi, come on in.
How you doing there, lady?
Doing good.
She said I got to see those pictures.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, I'm gonna show them in a second. You wouldn't believe them. I would love for y'all. Brady's in Nashville. Y'all should like go to lunch or something. He would love to see y'all. Yeah, I do. He taught my babies in Sunday school when they were little, so it is so good to see you. We do. All right. We think this is it. Coming this way. All right. What did you say? 7:30, 7:45?
Yeah, 7:45.
All right. See ya. All right, we're going to close the door. When we're out of seats, it's time to close the door, right? So, hello, everyone. Thank you guys for being here tonight. I was all geared up last week, but I don't know about y'all, but I stayed in my pajamas for about 4 days last week. It wasn't that bad. I made a lot of soup. So, as Brother Steve's probably already told you, I'm Stephanie Cook. As flattered as I am that he wants me to be a doctor, I am not a doctor, Cook. I do have a specialist in education degree, and I am a licensed school psychologist. I've been doing that since 1994. Ooh, that hurts. I also, a few years ago, went and got my certification in life coaching, and I'm also a certified Enneagram coach. So I do a lot of individual coaching. I do a lot of work with parents in school settings. And this particular curriculum that Brother Steve has come on in, has asked me about, I developed this a very, very long time ago. And for whatever reason, the Lord has really had it resurrected in the last few years. And in fact, I taught it Monday night, and I'm teaching it again tonight, and I'm getting lots of calls. So I feel like this is a very timely message. But I will have to tell you, when I pulled this out, all of the biblical stuff is still really true, right? But when I looked back, this is what my children, we'll go back to that. This is what my son looked like when I started this. So he was about 5 years old, 4 years old. This was my daughter. How precious, right? And in my heart, they're always going to be that size, that age. Harvey and BB were actually my son's Sunday school teachers when he was in kindergarten. And so they popped in to look at him. But this is what I got now. I've got adults. They're grown-ups, and we've even got this going on right now. So we've got a big year. We've got a big wedding coming in September. We're super excited about it. And I'm going to get a son-in-law who I adore. But yeah, so I don't have little toddlers anymore. And my kids are very much grown up. So I do want to talk about what we're going to cover So tonight we'll just do kind of an overview, some introductions. I want to hear a little bit about who you guys are. I'm not going to call you all out one by one, but I do want to know kind of what the audience is, who I'm talking to. Next week we will focus a lot on discipline and punishment, which is kind of, this is what everybody comes for. Like, tell us how to make them behave. And then we're going to talk about technology and boundaries. And I'm sure no one is having any issues with technology and their children, right? Like, easy breezy. Definitely a big deal right now, big deal. So we'll talk about that. Anxiety and fear, yours and theirs, because your anxiety bleeds over into their anxiety and vice versa. So we'll talk about that in week 4. Scheduling and activities, some time management strategies. We'll cover that in our 5th week. And then the last week we'll wrap up talking about spiritual disciplines, and again, yours and theirs. Sound good? Sound like stuff you guys are interested in hearing about? Good deal. So that's kind of what we got going on. So I've told you a little bit about my family. I'm going the wrong way. I want to hear a little bit about you guys. So how many of you have children under the age of 5? Okay. How many of you have elementary school age children? Like 5 to 12-ish. All right. What about middle school? Oh, God bless you. What about high school? Okay, so we got college, empty nesters. All right. Adult children? Yep. Okay, we got it all. Okay, good. Easy. Not hard to cover that at all. No, everything we talk about should be applicable. So definitely, again, we're really going to focus on overviews, on some biblical principles. I do want to make sure that you understand that these classes plus your efforts will not create perfect children. I also want to make sure that you understand that I am a human who raised humans. Like I said, I thought I had a lot of knowledge when I wrote this curriculum, and mine were like 5 and 3. Turns out I didn't know as much as I thought I did. And so even looking back, reading through the curriculum, I was like, oh my goodness, like some of my examples, I was like, you were an idiot and you just thought you knew what was going to happen. And so parenting, when humans are raising humans, there is no, predictability, honestly. We can do the best we can do. We can, give it all we've got, and things can turn out completely different than what we planned. And so I just want to make sure we're all on the same page with, this is not a, here you go, here's a how-to manual. We're going to talk about some principles. Hopefully we'll discuss some things. Hopefully I can answer some questions for you. I can give you my professional opinion just from working with kids for 30 plus years. I can give you my personal, what I've experienced. But every situation, every child, everything is going to be different. And so I want you to take all of this, as it is, some great information. And the rest of it, you're going to be on your knees, because that's what parenting is. It is a lot of time on your knees saying, Lord, make up the difference, because I don't know what I'm doing. I need you to make up the difference. And it's trial and error. So how many of you have siblings? Okay. How many of you have more than one child in your home right now? How many of you are different from your siblings or have a different children that live in your home that are nothing alike? Okay. Therein is part of our issue, right? So we all come into this world with our own temperament. We come into this world with, our own ideas. Your children, you can have 2 kiddos that obviously were birthed from the same mama, grew up in the same house, and are completely different. And so we're going to talk a lot about that when we talk about discipline, but fair and equal are not always the same thing. So one of the things we're going to talk about even tonight when we talk about, looking at a general overview is knowing your kids, understanding your kids, and understanding your own stuff, seeing your own blind spots is half the battle to parenting. Like recognizing, like I can tell you with my son, I could have literally beat his head against a wall for 9 years, and he was still going to be like, nope, I'm not doing it that way. My daughter, you give her a sideways glance, and she's a puddle of tears. So obviously, I disciplined them very differently. I had to, because one was incredibly stubborn, still is, and the other one was a people pleaser, and she wanted to follow the rules and do the right thing. So we just kind of have to really listen to what's going on with our kids, and we'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about discipline, but just kind of wanted to give you that overview. I want you to really think about, sometimes we can get so bombarded in what I call the trees that we miss the forest, okay? So children are a gift from God. We know that. It's a miracle that we even have a child. Like if you think about how all of that happens, it is way too much for us to even comprehend. If I look into like some of the neurology and the things that I've studied, I'm like, God is just mind blown, right? We'll never understand it all. So we have to recognize that for whatever reason, the Lord picked your home and your child and put them together. So whether this is a child that's biological or foster or adopted or came in through marriage, God ordained that union that you guys have. And so he trusts you. And so he wants you to trust yourself. So don't forget that having that child is a gift. It's a gift from God. It's God ordained. The other thing I want you to think about is, what is the goal of parenting? Like, what's the end game? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And so sometimes, again, especially when it comes to discipline, we can get so caught up in the weeds that we miss, like, what is the point? Like, what lesson am I trying to teach here? What's the foundation I'm trying to lay? The real question is, when they leave my home in 18, 24, sometimes 32 years, what is it that I want them to take away? What is it that I want to be sure that they know? What is it that I want to be 100% guaranteed that I have at least tried to instill in them? So when you're in the middle of those just messy situations and you're like, I don't know what to do, sometimes the best thing to do is just zoom way out and say, okay, what's the end game? Like, what's the end game? And even whether they're 2 or they're, 18, that's a very helpful question. Like, what am I doing right here? We're going to talk a little bit tonight about you putting on your oxygen mask first. It's very cliche, but stressed out parents don't do well when it comes to parenting. And a lot of times we are so depleted and so empty, and we're not taking care of ourselves. And so we're trying to parent out of exhaustion or a high level of stress or anxiety, out of anger, out of, hangry. I don't know how many of you are doing, like, it's January, if you may not be eating right now. Like, all those things. We're trying to parent, and we're not really taking great care of ourselves. So I'm just going to give you 8 kind of quick, again, general overview. This is not you have to do this. This is not Moses and the 10 Commandments. But a lot of things I'm going to give you, I just want you to kind of think about, okay? So the first thing is, it is very important, especially in a marriage, to schedule you time. Schedule it. Put it on a book. Put it in a schedule. And by schedule, I mean it goes in ink and nothing comes on top of that. So again, whether it's date nights or if you're someone, like my husband is very much an introvert, and so sometimes I know he's just got to have some time, like, away from everybody and everything, and that's been forever. I don't take that personally. I just know, like, okay, this is your time. Whatever it is, and I'm not saying that you get to, every day be like, this is my 3-hour window, nobody bother me. That's not what I'm talking about. But I think it's super important to at least once a month, again, especially as a couple, schedule some just you guys time. Because those of us that are empty nesters can tell you, there is a moment, at least for me, there was a moment of panic. When my kids walked out, I will never forget when my daughter, who's our baby, we dropped her off at college, we got home, and my husband and I, our anniversary is August the 10th. So every year we would take her to college on our anniversary or very close to it. And my husband's like, we're not celebrating anything, because I was just devastated. She and I are incredibly close. She was my baby. I just said when she left, it felt like the energy got sucked out of our house. Like, it was just, she's just the life of the party. She's just a lot of fun. So we came home, we had taken her to college, and both of my kids were very involved in sports. So we were that family that was always, at a sporting event, going. And it just felt like all of a sudden the train got to the station and it just stopped. And we were sitting in the living room. He was in one recliner, I was in the other, and I looked at him and I said, this is not going to work for me. And he was like, what are you saying? And I'm like, this, like Friday night in the recliner watching TV, this is not going to work for me. And so we, in that moment, had to commit to, okay, what are we going to do? And so now we love Friday night in the recliner. It works way better, but they've been gone quite a while. But immediately he's like, what do you need? And I'm like, well, let's redo this room. And so on Saturday morning, We went to Lowe's, and he said it was the best money he ever spent. He bought 2 gallons of paint, and we painted that room and redid it, and then I was kind of okay again. But it's a very scary thing. Like, all of a sudden, it's like, who are you? Like, what are we supposed to do now? Because we pour so much into our children, and it can really divide us. So again, not to harp too much on this, but schedule you time. And if you're a single parent, schedule you time. Take care of yourself. You're going to be a better parent for your children if you take care of yourself a little bit. Put the children to bed at a reasonable time. And again, I'm probably talking about, younger kids right now, but even teenagers, honestly. There's all kinds of research. I could give you just so many statistics about teenagers not having enough sleep. Like, they really need more sleep than any other age. But kids need a schedule. And so if at all possible, try to get them in bed at a reasonable time so that you may have an hour window or an hour and a half window before you get ready to go to bed, or just a little bit of time at night to do what you need to do. That teaches them one of two things. One, a schedule is just a good thing. It's just a good idea. Kids who do not have enough sleep are grumpy kids. End of discussion. But two, it also lets them know, like, you've got some things that you're going to do on your own, and like, you are a person and you need that time. And so if at all possible, put them to bed at a reasonable time. Teach your children to respect a closed door. Now, obviously, your mind probably went to one place, but I don't just mean in that regard. I mean, like, sometimes it's okay to go to the bathroom and close the door, and your children do not need to be in there with you. Like, teach them when the door is closed, it's closed for a reason, and unless someone is dying, do not come through that door. Like, if you teach them that when they're little, they will respect it. Now, they may sit. I can tell you a really funny story. My son, when my daughter was born, she was our surprise. And so we had planned a ski trip to Colorado. And so she was 2 weeks old, and we flew to Colorado with my extended family. So my brother and sister-in-law at that time, they're 3 years younger than us. And so they had, they were younger, married, newlyweds, no kids. And so there was a hot tub in my parents' bedroom, and so every night my sister-in-law and my brother would go into this, into the room and get in the hot tub together. Well, my son started going, "Uncle Kevin, are you taking a bath?" And so he did that every single night while they would go in there. And so it's a joke in our family to this day. My son's 28 years old. But anytime that my brother's in the bathroom, Brady will say, "Uncle Kevin, you taking a bath?" But he didn't go through the door, but he stood at the door yelling at them. So I'm not saying that will not always happen. But teach them that a closed door is closed for a reason, and to be respectful of that. Unite when disciplining children. This is really hard. Again, children are incredibly smart, and they play good cop, bad cop better than anything you've ever imagined. And so you guys need to be on the same page. And this may mean on these date nights that you're having some hard discussions about, okay, what are we going to do about this situation? Or how do we feel about this? And, depending on, we all bring into our parenting the way we were parented. And so one of two things happens. Either we had a great experience and we want to parent just like our parents did, or we thought it was horrible and we want to do the exact opposite of what our parents did, or somewhere in the middle, right? And so in our family, my husband and I are completely different. He's an engineer. He's very type A. He's very, like, one time I said to him, like, "Do you really want to die on that hill?" Talking about something going on with our teenagers. And he said, "I want to die on every hill." And I was like, awesome. So it was very much like he would lay down the law, and then I would, move the line a little bit. Like, I was the voice of reason sometimes. And so we figured it out, but my kids knew that. Like, they knew if I go to my dad, he's going to say no. Like, it's kind of a joke. Like, dad will say no automatically. If we go to mom, we're going to have a better shot. So they know that. They know that. So it's important that you guys have discussions, and that as much as possible, you can unite, especially in front of them. Now, sometimes that means they leave the room and y'all look at each other and go, "Are you kidding me? Like, that was the worst thing." You can do that. But in front of them, try to stay united. Don't create villains and heroes. How many of you have ever said or thought or heard, "You just wait till your father gets home"?
Oh, it don't work at my house.
It doesn't work at mine anymore either. But that's creating a villain, right? Like, one's a hero, one's a villain. So be careful that you don't always, like, one person is not always the one that drops the hammer. One person's not always the one that coddles. Like, don't create villains and heroes in your home when it comes to disciplining your kiddos. know your own limitations. Again, when we talk about temperament and some things in the future, we'll talk about being realistic with our kids. But, inevitably, we'll try to do too much in a day. Like, again, depending on what age your kids are. Like, I remember being so unrealistic. I'll give you a great example. Again, did y'all heard me say my husband's type A, right? Okay, so we went to Disney when our kids were 7 and 5, I think, 6 and 8, something like that. And so he had this whole vacation. When you go to Disney, it's a thing. Like, you got to research and plan, and he had every minute scheduled, and this is exactly how it was going to go. And it was just crazy. We had to be up at this time. We could eat at this time. We had to be on this ride at this time. In fact, I scrapbooked at the time, and I called it our survivor vacation, because I said we had to outplay, outwit, and outlast everyone there. But two funny things happened on that trip. One, we were standing in line to ride some ride, and I think Brady had to go to the bathroom or something, and my husband kind of snapped at him, and he said, "This is not the happiest place on earth." And so I was like, and then, of course, we stayed at like the cheapest hotel, like it was the All-Star Resort or something. I'm not a big Disney person, you can tell, but anyway, as we went by the pool, the kids were just crying, like, "Can we just go swimming? We want to go swimming." And Mark was like, "We've got a pool at home. Let's go." So he's dragging them to this park, and then they're not in a very good mood. I'm not in a very good mood. We're all tired. We've got headaches. We're exhausted. They just want to swim in the pool. But you got to know your limitations, right? So sometimes we set ourselves up with our kids. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, sometimes we put ourselves and our children in situations that, of course, they're going to go badly because we don't plan it very well, and we're not very realistic. So know your limitations. And then ask for help. There is no shame in going to a couple that's the same age as you, or a friend that's the same age as you, that has children the same age as yours, is what I'm saying. Go to children that are a little bit older. Like, it is okay to ask for help. I used to tell my son, like, "I've never done this before. Like, you're the first time I've ever been a mom, and I don't know what I'm doing." And so it's okay to ask for help. And so don't be afraid to do that. And then this is so huge. And I don't know about dads, because I'm not a dad, I'm a mom, but mom guilt is a real thing. And so we really, in this day and age, it is so easy to find someone to compare ourselves to, whether it's on social media, or it's at church, or it's at school, or it's in the PTA, or it's on a sports team. Like, we are constantly comparing ourselves. And so that can really, really do a number on you as a parent. One, it makes you do things that you don't even want to do because you're trying to keep up with somebody else or something. The other thing is, it can make you feel really bad about things. I say now, I cannot imagine, like, looking back, obviously my children, when I was raising them, I did not have social media. We had Martha Stewart, which, that was about it, and Oprah, right? So, like, we would see ideal things on TV if we chose to watch them. You guys as moms now, I'm like, not only do you have to feed your children healthy food and dress them a certain way, and your house has to look a certain way. I'm like, now the food you buy at the grocery store isn't even good enough. You got to grow your own daggum food, or you're not being a good parent. I'm like, how crazy does it get? How far do we have to go? And so I would just encourage you, stop comparison and go back to, what do we want in this home? What is our end game? What are we trying to get to? Because there will always be someone who seems to be doing it bigger or better than you. Always. And I would say, under number 7, ask for help. Have people that you 100% trust, that you can confide in and you can be honest with about things. Because your kids are going to mess up. You're going to mess up. And if you hide under a shroud of shame and you're afraid to say, "I don't know what we're doing here," or "this is what's going on," then the enemy loves that. He loves it. He loves to influence. If he can't influence us, then he'll isolate us. He'll make us think no one would ever understand this. No one could ever know about this. And so I would really encourage you to make sure that you have people in your circle that you're like, "I'm just going to tell it like it is, because somebody needs to help me with this situation." Any questions or comments about any of that?
I was just thinking in terms of, okay, because my oldest is almost 23.
Uh-huh.
So I was a teen mom. I've been doing this thing kind of for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have twins that are 15, and then my youngest is 10. And so, 3 girls and a boy. But when you hit on number 8, avoid comparison, I've learned that that's not just me comparing myself to other parents, but that's also comparing my children
To one another.
For example, my son, I'm a proud mom moment. Like he's a financial analyst for the state of Tennessee, and did really well in school. The twins kind of mediocre like I was, and then my youngest, she's had more reservations and whatnot in school, and so I have to be very conscientious about not comparing, and that on a maturity level too, because different children are different. Therefore, I would have punished my son in one manner because he was more discerning and understanding.
Right.
Whereas, the baby, obviously, you mentioned that, the baby's the baby. So my youngest, I'm probably a little bit more lax with her.
Yeah.
Just because I know I'm not going to have any more. So, I just kind of see a correlation in that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Yeah, and it's good to not compare because they are different. They are very different. So, good. Yeah, good point. All right, I want you to think about this too. We all go through these stages of psychosocial development, and so we're going to talk about just very quickly, because this is something I want you to think about, is what stage is my child in? Because some of what you think is like, this is problematic, is this normal, should this be going on, is because of whatever psychosocial stage they're in, or whatever psychosocial stage you're in. So not just your kids, but us. So the first year of life, Erickson calls that the trust versus mistrust, right? If I cry, is someone going to attend to my needs? If I'm hungry and I cry, am I going to get fed? If I'm wet, will someone change my diaper? If I fall down, will someone pick me up? That is the age when children and parents bond. That's the age when kids learn to trust. And there's all kinds of ramifications if they do not bond with adults during this stage. I won't get into all that, but it's really important during that first year of life. It's that trust versus mistrust stage. Makes sense, right? Then from 1 to 3, it's autonomy versus shame and doubt. How many of you have a child between the ages of 1 and 3? Anybody? Have you ever heard, let me do it, I can do it, me do it, I can do it? Yeah, that's what you get a lot during that 1 to 3, because they're trying to figure out, like, am I autonomous? Can I do this by myself? And then what do? Sometimes we shame them. We make them think they can't. We do things for them. It's very natural. It's a lot easier. It's a whole lot easier to do things for them. But we've got to let them develop this autonomy. And that takes a lot of patience and a lot of time, right? Again, I'm going to tell on myself, but I do like a TikTok video. And so there's this really cute little video of this little girl trying to bake a cake. And she's probably 3 years old. And her mom is just like, you can see her just going, like, please get this done. It's so slow. She's so methodical. She is so proud of herself. But it took everything in that mama to not jump in and do it for her. And that's what we do. That's what we do a lot of times. Stages 3 to 5 is initiative versus guilt. So this is before they go to school. Again, they're becoming more and more independent. They want to do things by themselves. They want more freedom. And then guilt's the opposite of that. It's that, being too on top of them, not letting them do enough by themselves. Again, this is right before they go into school. Stage 4 is that elementary school, industry versus inferiority. For a lot of kids, and again, these developmental stages are getting pushed way down because when Erickson did this, obviously there wasn't a lot of like daycare settings and things like that. So when he talked about industry versus inferiority, this was really the first time students were comparing themselves to one another because it's the first time they were in class with each other. So it's when the teacher would put the artwork up on the wall. They were getting grades. They were being analyzed. And so they were trying to figure out, like, am I going to be inferior or have I got this school thing going on? Then you got adolescence. Oh, wow. Identity versus role confusion. The whole point of adolescence is, who the heck am I? What do I believe? What am I going to push back against? What am I going to take with me? So again, that rebellion is very, very normal and very necessary. Now, I will tell you there's a lot of research now, which kind of scares me a little bit, that this stage is being pushed way further. So it's not beginning till like 18 or 19. And again, not to shame anyone or anything like that, but a lot of it is like the tracking that parents do, the involvement that parents have now. Even colleges and universities, professors are saying they rarely have independent kids. Their parents are still incredibly involved. And so that stage is being pushed further, which is a little dangerous because they're going through role confusion and identity at a much later age, and they're more, they are more independent. They don't have the same safety net they have as an adolescent, and so it's creating much bigger issues. So that's a theory right now that's going on. Stage 6, young adulthood, intimacy versus isolation. Typically, young adulthood is where you find your mate, your friends, your partner. You start to establish your own family, your own life, your own situation. So that's what's going on at that young adulthood stage. Middle adulthood is to about the age of 50, 55. I'm like, ooh, I'm right there on the edge of that. But that's that generativity versus stagnation. In other words, that's developing your career, who am I? Like, what am I going to do with my life? I'm given to the world. It's a lot of giving, raising my family, raising my kids, contributing to things. And then late adulthood is integrity versus despair. So that's looking back, saying, did I do enough? Was I enough? What kind of job did I do? Recognizing that, life will come to an end at some point, and trying to make sure that you lived a life that you're proud of. Any questions about any of those stages? Do you see your children in those stages? Like, as I was talking about them, are you like, oh, yeah, we're there? Yes.
We have grandchildren, right? We've been through all this, but it seems to me that, like with our grandson, he just turned 13, adolescence for him seemed to start a little sooner than I would have expected. Yeah, so it's kind of a catch-22, right? Which when we talk about technology, we'll talk about this, but they literally walk around with the world in their pockets, and they are exposed to things way before they're developmentally ready to be. So they do have some of that adolescence is starting a lot sooner because of the exposure to things, but they don't have the capacity to deal with that. Like, they're not equipped, they don't have the resilience, they don't have the tools, and so it creates just a lot of issues. So they're not mature enough to handle that. So yeah, we'll talk a lot more about that with technology, but yeah, you're right about that too. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up with 5 things that I feel like we must give our kiddos. And again, 10,000 foot view, 5 things that we want to talk about. And the first is time. How many of you have said in the last week, I don't have time for that, or I'm out of time, or I'm so stressed, or I'm late, or I'm hurried? Anybody but me? Yeah? Okay. We live in an incredibly hurried society. I believe with all of my heart that the enemy uses our schedules and our hurriedness to distract us, to keep us off target, to keep us annoyed, to really tear us apart. And at some point we were sold a bill that as long as we had quality time with our kids, we didn't have to have quantity time with our kids or our spouses. That's a bunch of baloney. So quality time only comes out of quantity time. Like, that's how it happens, right? I mean, if your spouse said to you, like, hey, let's get married, but I only want to spend 2 days a year with you, like, but they're going to be great days, like, fabulous. Like, we'll go on a vacation, like, it'll be amazing. Like, that's not the same. It's not the same. And so what we are doing, again, and we'll talk more about our schedules at the end of, one of our, in a week in the future, but, it's kind of like if you've ever tried to carry too many groceries out of the trunk of the car into the kitchen, what inevitably happens is you drop something, things start falling, and it's the same thing with our time. And it's much more detrimental when we're dropping people as opposed to dropping things. You can only pile so much on your plate. Here's the thing about time. We all have the same amount of time in the day. So whether you are the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, or you are a stay-at-home mom, or you are a professor, or you are a grave digger. Like, we all have 24 hours in a day. And we can't buy more time, we can't make more time, we can't get more time. And so the thing we don't always realize about our time is, just like our money, we have to tell our time where to go. And we are in a society now where people are making a lot of money. You have probably thousands of people whose only job is to distract you, to get you to watch Netflix over and over and over again. I mean, it is no secret that the reason that the next Netflix show starts within like what, a minute and a half or something? Is it even that long? It's to keep you sitting there because you are a consumer of a product. Same thing with social media. Their job is to fix that algorithm so you stay connected all the time. Marketing, all of those things are to steal your time. And so when we talk about time later, we're going to talk about being very intentional about what makes it into our calendar and how we spend our time. But you definitely want to think about how much time you're spending with your child and what you're doing during that time. So not just quantity time, but quality time as well. And we'll talk a lot more about that when we talk about schedules. The second thing is unconditional love. And it sounds very cliche. I do want to read out of the Message paraphrase, 1 Corinthians 13, which is the love chapter, in just a second. But I really was even thinking about this particular idea this week. So my husband teaches our life group. We live in Clarksville and go to Hillsdale Baptist, which is where, I was there when Brother Steve was called to preach. We were really good friends. So we've known him forever. But I was thinking about, as my husband was teaching the lesson, he was talking about when Jesus appeared to Peter and the disciples after the resurrection, and they were fishing, and it was the, throw the net onto the other side of the boat story. Are y'all familiar with that story where it's like they weren't catching anything, and he said, throw it on the other side of the boat. And then he said to Peter, Peter, do you love me? And Peter said, of course I love you. And he said, feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? Of course I love you. Feed my lambs. So I'd heard that story my whole life. But for whatever reason, on Sunday, it dawned on me like this was post-denial. So there had to have been a conversation at some point. Can you imagine when Peter saw Jesus for the first time and his last memory was, I denied him 3 times. Like, I didn't do what I said I was going to do. The guilt that he must have felt and the shame that he must have felt because he was a human being. And yet, here we are, post-resurrection. Did a conversation happen or not? We don't know. It's not recorded, but you would have thought it would have had to have happened, right? And Jesus, again, I know Jesus is Jesus and we're human beings, but he could have held quite the grudge over that, right? Like, even if he was like, yeah, Peter, I love you, he didn't have to be like, and I'm going to build my church on you and feed my lambs, feed my sheep. Like, it was like all was forgiven. And not just Peter, but all the disciples. But Peter was, I associate with Peter because he tends to say really dumb things. And I'm all about that at the wrong time. And he's very impulsive. And anyway, I love Peter. But it just dawned on me like what type of unconditional love it took for the Lord to walk back among them and be like, y'all doubted. Even though I did all these things, even though, I did miracles among you and I was with you day in and day out, you still were like, no, I'm not with him. I'm not with him. And so it really got me thinking about even forgiveness with our children. Sometimes it's hard to forgive them. If they have not already, spoiler alert, they will break your heart at some point. They will break your heart many times at some point. And so it's really hard, even though we love them dearly, the forgiveness piece can sometimes be hard. Sometimes we forgive them, but we hold a grudge. We hold it over their heads forever and ever. And then to flip that on its head, the other thing we have to be willing to do is sometimes ask for forgiveness because we are human beings. And it is okay to say to your child, like, I really screwed that up and I'm sorry. I need to ask for your forgiveness. And so unconditional love really involves forgiveness as well. But if you read out of the Message paraphrase, and again, I know this is a paraphrase, but I love the way 1 Corinthians 13 is listed here. So it says, love never gives up. Love cares more for others than for self. Love doesn't want what it doesn't have. I'll just, in full transparency, we've gone through a really hard season with my son. He went through a divorce last year that was devastating for our family, for him too, and we went through some really hard things. And one of the things that my therapist said to me was, you're going to have to love the child you have and not the child you want. And that was so hard to hear. And when I look at this, it says love doesn't want what it doesn't have. And again, that comparison, sometimes it's like, why can't you be more like her child? Or why can't you be more like him? And so love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Love doesn't strut. Again, many times I was convicted when my kids were little about making them idols. Like, I loved to dress my daughter up like a Barbie and be like, she's beautiful and precious and wonderful. They're not to strut. They're not to strut. They're not idols in our lives. Love doesn't have a swelled head. Love doesn't force itself on others. It isn't always me first. Love doesn't fly off the handle. Who's ever flown off the handle on their child? Guilty. Which, by the way, when they're adults, they love to tell those stories and reminisce. Like my son will be like, do you remember that? And it's like, can we not? Which, if we have time, y'all remind me to tell you a funny story before we wrap up tonight. Okay. Love doesn't revel when others grovel. It takes pleasures. It doesn't take pleasure in the flowering of truth. It puts up with anything. It trusts God always. It always looks for the best. It never looks back, but it keeps going to the end. And so when you think about loving unconditionally, and I want you to think about that particular chapter in 1 Corinthians. Respect. Respect does not mean that your children are equals. It doesn't mean that they get to reason their way out. You don't have to have a conversation with your 2-year-old about why the sugary cereal is not a good idea. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. But respect, like, how do you know someone respects you? Like, what are some ways that you guys would say, I've showed them respect and this is how they would know? Yeah. Tone of voice, the way you talk to them, the words you use. What else?
Listen.
You really listen. Yep. Eye contact. Yeah. And so as much as you want your children to give those things to you, it's important that you give them to them as well. And so it is okay to discipline, even to punish, with a tone of voice that's respectful. Like, it can definitely happen. And one of my favorite things, I'm being a school psychologist, I work in special education a lot. And so one of my dear friends was a math teacher at Rossview High for many years, and she worked with some pretty rough kiddos. And I just would always admire the respect with which she disciplined them. Like, they still got the whatever it was, whether it was ISS or, they got written up or they were tardy. Like, there was still a consequence, but she wasn't hateful about it. She didn't go on and on about it. It was just like, I have to do this because I care about you. And then they moved on. And I just always admired the way that she showed respect. And as a result, those boys respected her as well. And so I think the same thing is true in our parenting. We want to make sure that, we do unto others as we would have them do unto us, right? The fourth thing is discipline, and we'll talk again all next week. We're going to talk about discipline. But a lot of times we think about discipline and we think about it being punishment. And punishment and discipline are not the same thing at all. In fact, I want to read again from the message, Hebrews 12, 5 through 11, about how the Lord disciplines us, because I think it's a really good illustration of how we're to discipline. So Hebrews chapter 12, it says, "My dear child, don't shrug off God's discipline, but don't be crushed by it either. It's the child he loves that he disciplines. The child he embraces, he also corrects. God is educating you. That's why you must never drop out. He's treating you as dear children. This trouble you're in isn't punishment, it's training, the normal experience of children. Only irresponsible parents leave children to fend for themselves. Would you prefer an irresponsible God? We respect our own parents for training and not spoiling us, so why not embrace God's training so we can truly live? While we were children, our parents did what seemed best to them. But God is doing what is best for us, training us to live God's holy best. At the time, discipline isn't much fun. It always feels like it's going against the grain. Later, of course, it pays off handsomely, for it's the well-trained who find themselves mature in their relationship with God." So a couple of things I love about that is where it says it's not necessarily punishment, but it's training. And that's what we think when we think about a disciplined runner. We don't think about a runner that's getting a spanking every day. We think about a runner that has a schedule, that takes care of their body, that takes care of their rest, that they're disciplined. They're trying to get to a goal. They're a disciplined runner. And so when we think about discipline, punishment is a consequence, but discipline is a lifestyle. And so when we talk about discipline, we're going to talk about boundaries, and we're going to talk about several different components of that. But I want you to think about it as training. It's proactive. It's not reactive. And then lastly, of course, the most important thing we will give our kids is the message of Christ. And I will tell you, doing what you're doing, the fact that you're here is really important. Taking your kids to church, incredibly important, very beneficial. But the biggest message they're going to get is by watching the way that you live your life. That's a little scary, but it's also very encouraging, because the message of Christ really comes from how you model in your home. And again, just to I'm going to go to another scripture in Deuteronomy, just to remind you guys, chapter 6. Of course, you've heard this. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength, and you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands I'm giving you today. But this part really stands out to me. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you are at home and when you are away on a journey, when you are lying down and when you are getting up. That to me sounds like doing life, right? When you're on a journey, when you're at home, when you're lying down, when you're getting up, everything that you do is sending a message to your kids and the way that you live your relationship with the Lord. And again, not to guilt anyone. I'm never here to should anyone or guilt anyone, so please hear me say that, because if I don't say it again next week, I just want you to know that from the get-go. I'm not a should person. But I will say, the way that you treat the waitress that gets your order wrong at the Cracker Barrel, it's an election year. I don't know about you, but the last election year we had was not great for me. It was not fun. I'm not a conflict person. I hate conflict, and I just kind of want to hide. How you talk about, the candidate that you're for or against, how you talk about people in the community, how you talk about their friends, all of those things, you're sending a message through actions and words. And the last week we'll talk about spiritual disciplines a little bit more, but I want you to just think about the message of Christ is the most important thing that you're going to give your kids. And when we think about end game, that's eternity. That's the most important thing. Not how they do here, not if they're on the honor roll or they're top of their class or they get into a good college or they get a scholarship for a sport or what. Yes, all that's important, but it's temporary. It's temporal. It's not forever. This is eternity that we're talking about. And so it is by far the most important thing that we can do. And so again, I want to read to you one more last time. I appreciate you guys letting me read like that, but I think these verses just illustrate so much good stuff. So this is Ephesians chapter 5, and it says, watch what God does, and then you do it, like children who learn proper behavior from their parents. Mostly what God does is love you. Keep company with him and learn a life of love. Observe how Christ loved us. His love was not cautious, but extravagant. He didn't love in order to get something from us, but to give everything of himself to us. Love like that. And so I love to take out of that scripture that the Lord's love is not cautious, but it is extravagant. And so when we love our kids, we want to love them extravagantly. And we'll talk more about what that means in the upcoming weeks. Any questions or comments? Okay, before I pray, I'll tell you this really quick story because we got a couple minutes. So, like I said, I've been a school psychologist for 30 years. I was a school psychologist at the school where my children went to elementary school. And I've already established, my son was my stubborn kid. And inevitably, every time there was a substitute in his class, he would get in trouble because his teachers learned to love him. He's one of those that, when you understand, he's not trying to be a smart aleck and a know-it-all, then you kind of like him. But at first, you're like, I don't know about this. So every time there was a sub in his class, inevitably, he'd get in trouble. And so I worked at two schools. So my other school was about 45 minutes on the other side of town. So one day I'm driving home from the other side of town. My husband calls me and he says, Brady got in trouble today. There was a substitute in his class. And I'm like, oh, you're kidding. And it was always very embarrassing to me, because it's my school. I don't want the principal to be like, your kid's a brat. And so I was like, what happened? And he was like, I don't even remember what he told me. And he's like, he's in his room. I'm going to let you deal with it when you get home. And I was like, okay. So I get home, I'm so mad, at the end of day, not being my best self, and I march up to his room, and he's sitting on his bed, and he's smirking, and it flies all, I'm like, you think this is funny? It flies all over me. And before I know it, not my proudest parenting moment, I reach up and pop his little face, and as I'm doing it, I hear my husband and my daughter running up the stairs going, April Fools! April Fools! I'm like, and Brady goes, that hurt so bad, but it was so worth it. So you would think that's bad enough, but no, in our county, for 4-H, the kids write speeches. And so Brady chose to write his speech about his mother, the school psychologist, and the April Fool's prank that they played on her. And not only did he win at the school level and the district level, he went on to the next level to give this speech in front of all these people. So I'll just say, I tell you all that to say, you just never know where your behavior is going to end up. Again, another story we laugh about now, but yeah, one of our favorites. Not my finest parenting moment by far. So let's pray. Jesus, we love you so much. We thank you for the opportunity to be parents, God. I think sometimes we can just get so tired and confused and worried that we forget to say thank you and to be grateful for this opportunity. And Lord, I just pray that through our time together each week that you'll bless it. That, Lord, anything that I say that is not in your will or not something that you feel like that folks need to hear, I just pray you'll erase it from their minds, that they won't even hear it. But, Lord, I pray that you will bless our time together and bless our efforts, Lord, and definitely, as I pray all the time, make up the difference. Where we fall short, Lord, you can make a big difference in the lives of our kids. We love you, and we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.